Thank you very much for inviting me to this great college. In 1980, I toyed with the idea of joining my best friends who had applied to an admission to the BA program in economics here at St. Stephen's. But I had worked really, really hard for the IIT exam, and so I succumbed. I succumbed to what is known as the sunk cost fallacy and studied electrical engineering instead of economics. Now, I don't regret a moment of that misspent youth, but I do hope that you will grant me temporary membership of your club today, given that I've tried to do work which is associated with the club. In the last few weeks, I've outlined the RBI's approach to a variety of issues: inflation, distressed debt, financial inclusion, banking sector reform, and market reform. And today, what I'd like to do is cap off these talks to first discuss why central banking is not as easy as it seems. Now, for many amongst the public, it just consists of two things: printing money, and two, raising interest rates or cutting them, right? It's a little more than that. And often we need to take decisions, sometimes hard to explain, sometimes quite unpopular. And these have to be made under conditions of extreme uncertainty. Because of all this, I will argue that what we need is a trusted, independent central bank, and I'll explain the factors that will in fact lead to such an institution. So, to set the stage for this discussion, I want you to think back a little to the summer of 2013. This was after Chairman Bernanke had hinted that the US may in fact end quantitative easing, and suddenly you saw waves of capital flowing out of the emerging markets. And as this capital flowed out, it flowed out especially from those who were deemed to have weak fundamentals. India at that time was running a large current account deficit. It had a large fiscal deficit. It had near double-digit inflation, and was well and truly in the pack that was called the Fragile Five. In those weeks, the rupee plunged on a daily basis as debt investors scurried to safe havens. And the talk in international markets, lose no doubt, and by people who didn't know better, was that the rupee would reach 100 to the dollar, and some even talked about a debt crisis in India. Of course, these people didn't know fully what conditions in India were, but certainly there was a fair amount of alarm in the markets. Now, at that point, in August 2013, I was appointed to succeed Dr. Subba Rao as the governor of the Reserve Bank, and in preparation for that, I went from the Finance Ministry to the Reserve Bank to figure out if there's something we could do as soon as I took office. Now, the key then was to gain the confidence of international investors and to convince them that India was still a very attractive place to invest in, despite the then paralyzed economic reforms. Furthermore, for anybody to invest in India, they had to believe that the rupee would retain its value going forward. So I went to the Reserve Bank. I went from room to room asking RBI staff what they were working on and what ideas for financial sector reform they were prepared to contemplate. And as I moved through the rooms, we got a number of ideas which we packaged together into a reform program over the medium term. And the idea was put enough together so that it changes in the narrative on India. A narrative which at that time was bleak, but change it to a narrative where at least the contemplation of financial sector reforms, when added to the fiscal reforms the government was undertaking, could present a much healthier picture of India. We also had to do something about the value of the rupee. The rupee was plunging daily. And to give confidence to investors, we had to promise them the rupee would hold its value over the medium term. Best way to do that is to bring down inflation. So one of the more important things was to say that Indian inflation would be brought down. And for that, I asked my deputy governor then, and now my successor, Dr. Urjit Patel, to prepare a report on how we could move to a new inflation-focused monetary regime. However, even that would only kick in over time, as people started believing we would in fact do that, we needed some fix in the short term. And the short-term fix had to be something which showed we could raise money. We had reserves, but people weren't sure we could raise money, so they weren't sure that the reserves won't be depleted. Now, at that point, I started thinking about an IFI scheme which had been presented to me when I was in North Block. Essentially, bankers had come to us and told us they'd bring in plenty of dollars as FCNRB deposits. You don't need to know the acronym, foreign currency non-resident, if you're interested. These are 3-year deposits. But in return for doing a strong marketing campaign to bring this money in, what they wanted is a promise that they would be able to convert they would bring the dollars in, convert them to rupees, but 3 years later they wanted to convert them back to dollars. What they wanted was a very favorable rate at which they could convert the money back to dollars. In a sense, they wanted a cheap forward rate. That was a subsidy. And it was a subsidy that could be enormous because they were essentially asking for something which could mount to tens of thousands of crores if we paid out fully. Now, I didn't think much of the scheme initially. I thought this was yet another situation where interested parties brought schemes which benefited themselves, and it was a ploy to get a subsidy from a country in trouble. But the scheme refused to go away, and certainly my old colleagues at the Finance Ministry were giving it some weight and thought it worth a try, especially as the crisis of confidence in the currency mounted. Now, so we started reflecting on it. I became a little more favorable, first by weighing the balance of risks. If we did nothing and the crisis of confidence continued, the rupee could stay undervalued by, say, 3 or 4 rupees to the dollar. Remember, it had hit 67 or 68 at that time. So what that meant was our imports would be costlier. Each dollar of imports would be costlier by 3 rupees if we let it stay. We were importing 400 billion plus in dollar imports, which means the cost to us, if for every rupee of undervaluation, would be 40,000 crores. Multiply that by 3 or 4 rupees in undervaluation, and very quickly you come to serious money, 1.5 lakh crores a year in losses if we had an undervalued rupee. Surely it would be compensated by other factors like greater exports and so on, but certainly undervaluation would have consequences to national income. The second sort of thought on this was the bankers who came saying, look, if the scheme is wildly successful, a lot of money will pour in, a lot of dollars will come in, and the rupee will not be undervalued, the rupee will increase in price, and so the forward contracts that you give us will then be not so expensive as you thought initially. Now, this is not quite true. The truth is that what was important to make money on this scheme was the money had to come in, it had to increase confidence in the rupee, and beyond when the money came in, the rupee had to continue appreciating. Only then could we cover ourselves in forward markets at a cheaper rate than we had promised the bankers, and thereby we would make money. So this was not as certain as the bankers suggested. It was a scheme which would certainly benefit them. With some probability, we would make significant losses on it, but with some probability it would work out, the money would come in, confidence in the rupee would increase, the rupee would continue appreciating, and we would be able to cover ourselves in forward markets at a relatively cheap price and actually make money on the scheme. There were no certainties here because it was quite possible after the money came in, people will say that's the end of the money coming in, the rupee is going to plunge again, and it would in fact plunge. So there were risks in this scheme. Now, this is the kind of policy making you have to do. There are no certainties. There's nothing that economic theory tells you. You have to weigh the balance of risk. Large costs if you can't bring the rupee back to fundamentals, but also potential costs from the scheme if it doesn't work out as advertised. Okay, so smaller costs if it doesn't work out as advertised, large costs if you do nothing. When you have no good options, you take the least bad one. So on the day that I took up governorship, I had to decide, go for it, risk losses to the central bank and to the country, but risk larger losses if we had no alternative scheme. So we picked it. We decided to do it because policy making is ultimately about deciding. In the face of uncertainty, no doubt, after weighing alternatives as best as one can. Turned out that the scheme drew in $26 billion, much more than any of us ever expected. Confidence in the rupee picked up, and the rupee continued strengthening beyond when the money came in, as potentially we had hoped when we took up the scheme. A part of it was good luck, because the global environment and the global investor mood strengthened, and the Indian political situation also started looking that we would have a more stable government. And as a result, we could cover our forward swaps very cheaply, and we ended up breaking even or making money on these swaps. Now, we're fully covered for outflows today, and the rupee has been one of the most stable emerging market currencies since then. So in hindsight, this now seems like the obvious thing to do, because it worked, right? And the reality is, we were not sure at that point. There was no confidence that this scheme would in fact work. And it's not even clear, with the benefit of hindsight, that it was a scheme which made the difference. Perhaps it was our statements on inflation. Perhaps it was the other elements of the package that made a difference. And the reason I say all this is, a lot of you will read autobiographies of eminent people, especially policymakers, and typically they're written 4 or 5 years after the events, and in it the author has mapped, the author writes as if he had mapped everything out with perfect foresight, ignoring the risks and the uncertainties at that time. Now, I think these are as misleading about public policy as those beautiful photographs of past holidays which abstract from the heat, the mosquitoes, and the lack of internet connectivity. The bottom line is policy making invariably involves taking measured risks in the face of uncertainty. Now, clearly, we don't want to be in the position we were in August 2013 ever again, and which is why from every forum I say macroeconomic stability is of paramount importance for India. Now, equally clearly, what I want to draw from this experience is the central bank must have the resources, the knowledge, and the professionalism to act when the situation warrants. And in the rest of the talk, what I want to argue is why this what I want to argue is why this means India needs a strong and independent RBI to ensure macroeconomic stability, and then discuss what will ensure such independence going forward. So let me start first with why do I keep saying we need macroeconomic stability, and what are the concerns from the public dialogue about this? Well, clearly growth is good. We all want growth. We all want more growth than we have today. But growth with stability is much better, especially in a poor country where so many people live at the margin. Instability affects them in a trice, and they have very few buffers to protect themselves when we have significant downturns. Now, for the RBI, what does this mean? It means that we should ensure that growth does not exceed our capacity to grow. We don't grow excessively by building up risks, that we adopt prudential policies to contain whatever risks are there, and we build sufficient buffers for the country, such as foreign exchange reserves, to ensure that the country is protected against the shocks which inevitably will come from the global economy. Now, this, of course, exposes the central bank to criticism. If we try and bring down inflation, for example, interest rates will remain higher than borrowers desire, because we will have to raise interest rates to curb inflation. Now, if inflation comes down, the currency will depreciate less than in the past, and some exporters may be miffed because they want a depreciating currency. If we push banks to clean up, the banks may be less tolerant towards habitual non-payers, and we have yet another set of customers or citizens who are unhappy. Whatever we do, almost inevitably someone will object. There are few actions the RBI can take which everybody will be happy about. So we then become the favorite scapegoat for underperformance. If exports are not picking up, it's because interest rates are too high and because the exchange rate is too strong. I want to pick this particular argument because I want to argue again and again, when people criticize our policies, they criticize in one facet. But you have to look at the policies as a complete whole, because everything ties to everything else. So for example, supposing somebody says the exchange rate is too strong, we want a depreciated exchange rate. Well, I don't have a button to press which will suddenly depreciate the exchange rate, but what I can do is go out into the market and start buying dollars. Okay? I can buy lots of dollars. We have been buying some dollars. We have today around $370 billion in reserves. But if we buy dollars in a big way to depreciate the exchange rate, what happens? We put in a whole lot of liquidity into the market, a whole lot of rupees. And if that is not to cause inflation, we have to suck it out by selling government bonds into the market. Okay, many of you who've done basic economic courses understand this as sterilization. Well, as you suck the money out, because the RBI is selling bonds along with the government, what happens to interest rates? They start going up. Okay? So the consequence of intervening extremely in the currency is higher interest rates. Moreover, if the exchange rate depreciates, we are buying goods from abroad at a higher price. So we have higher inflation, which means the policy interest rate, not just the bond rates, but also the monetary policy rate will have to go up. Once again, this means higher interest rates. So the same guys who are saying, let's have a much more depreciated exchange rate, are also saying, let's have a much lower interest rate. You can't have both at the same time if you're going to have a reasonable macroeconomic equilibrium. Just look at Brazil or Russia and understand that you cannot have a significantly depreciated exchange rate and lower interest rates at the same time. The problem, of course, is that our critics are not subject to the requirement of consistency. They want to have their cake and eat it too. Which means for us, we have to keep reiterating why we're doing it and why it's consistent across the board. Let me give you another example. This is a little tougher, so students pay attention. This is a lesson in the central bank balance sheet. There's a fundamental lesson in economics that Milton Friedman used to offer, which was there is no such thing as a free lunch. Okay. This can be seen in the matter of the RBI's dividends. Now, some commentators have suggested that the public sector banks can be entirely recapitalized if only the RBI paid a larger dividend to the government. Okay? And let me explain why matters are not so simple. Now, again, follow me closely because this is not a very simple explanation, but if you follow me closely, I'm sure you will understand. And because it's your money that we're talking about, I hope you will pay attention. So let's start with how the RBI generates profits, okay? How do we generate surplus? Well, we print the currency held by the public as well as issue deposits to commercial banks, which they're forced to hold. We call them reserves, reserve requirements. We don't pay any interest on this. These are the ways we raise money. And essentially, this is how we are financed. If you hold currency in your pocket, I'm sure everyone has that currency, you are financing the RBI, okay? And you're financing us interest-free. Now, we take that financing and buy foreign exchange assets, US treasuries, UK treasuries. We also buy Indian government bonds. But these are interest-paying assets. So we get interest on one side, from our assets. We don't pay any interest on our liabilities. Nice business, right? If you could have it. We make a ton of money as a result. Over and above, this is not about money printing, this is about how we get interest income, and we do other things which generate fee income, but this is largely how we do it. Our total costs, including the costs of currency printing and the commissions we pay the bankers on behalf of the government, these are the two largest segments of cost, amount to about only 1/7 of our interest income. So we earn a large surplus profit because of our role as the manager of the country's currency. For those of you who know the economics jargon, much of this is seigniorage income. This therefore belongs entirely to the country's citizens, to all of you, because this is money we generate because we print the currency and you hold it. Now, therefore, we have to give it back to the citizenry, and after setting aside what is needed to maintain the creditworthiness of the RBI as an international agent, the RBI board pays out the remaining surplus to the RBI's owner, which is the government. Now, our board has decided that it wants the RBI to have a AAA rating in international markets so it can do the kinds of transactions which were done in 2013. When there's a lot of fear about India, nobody questioned the RBI's ability to deliver on the forward swaps that we had undertaken. And that was because we were a well-capitalized, highly respected central bank. And so the RBI's board basically says, we want this to remain the case so you can come to the rescue when in need, which often is a situation when the country is in trouble. Therefore, we want you to remain well capitalized. And based on the analysis of the RBI staff, a risk management analysis, the board has decided that the current levels of capital, which is about 10 lakh crores, is enough to fully capitalize the RBI. As a result, over the last 3 years, because we have enough capital, we have paid out all the surplus we generate to the government of India, and it has used it in its budget. This has amounted to 66,000 crores in the last 2 years, each of the last 2 years. The magnitude of the dividends we have paid in the last 3 years is about equal to what we paid in the 10 years before that. So we've paid an enormous amount of dividends to the government. We also have paid dividends. The dividends we pay are about equal in order of magnitude to the dividends paid by the entire public sector to the government of India. So we pay everything that we can. But yet, despite this enormous payment, some have suggested we should pay more, a special dividend over and above the surplus we generate. Now, it's not legally possible to do this because the central bank can only pay realized surplus. Moreover, our board has to consider whether the additional dividend would compromise the creditworthiness of the RBI. But there is a more fundamental reason why the RBI cannot pay more, and I'll explain that to you. And the point of this is to say why central banking is not as easy as it seems. And here's why. Now, the surplus we make comes from interest payments on government assets and things like that, right? So what happens when we get paid that money is money comes out of the system. When we pay that to the government, that money gets paid back into the system. Net effect is no change in the money in the system because we're paying back what we earned. But what if we pay a special dividend to the government? We're essentially creating new money, additional money. Now, every year we start out by saying this is the amount of additional money we have to create. Because if we create more additional money, we will have inflation. After all, inflation is about too much money chasing too few goods. So given a target for the amount of money we have to create, if we have to pay anything over and above that, we have to do what I said earlier, suck it back out by selling government bonds. And that's where the problem lies. We pay a large extra dividend to the government. The government says, wonderful, now I don't need to sell this amount of bonds in the market in order to finance the budget. But lo and behold, we turn around and we'll sell all those bonds into the market because we want to pull back the cash we put in. The net effect is the market has to absorb the same amount of government bonds regardless of the size of the special dividend we issue. But ultimately, the whole point about getting the RBI to finance this is for the government to issue fewer bonds in the market, for fewer bonds for the market to absorb. That objective is not achieved. So to understand this, you have to understand that the RBI's dividend is not like the dividend of any public sector firm. It is different because the RBI prints the money. And therefore, asking the RBI to pay a special dividend, you have to look at the monetary consequences. Once you see the monetary consequences, you conclude there is no free lunch here. So this is why I've been saying again and again in public fora, we'll transfer whatever surplus we have, provided our board is satisfied we're well capitalized. But beyond that, don't ask for more, because there simply isn't a way to pay you more without withdrawing it in other ways. And instead, what you have to do is figure out how you capitalize the banks. Look at the RBI's equity, which is highly valued, as an asset that you hold, and tell the markets that your debt, that the government debt is much lower than currently suggested because of these assets. Now, for those of you who want to look at this argument again, there'll be a written document put out. But the point I wanted to make is things are not so easy as just raising interest rates and cutting interest rates. There is a lot more reasoning which goes into many of our decisions. And because this reasoning is sometimes fairly detailed, there are situations where we have to say no to certain kinds of suggestions without being able to explain to the full satisfaction of the layperson why we're saying no. Similar detailed rationales, for example, lead us to turn down demands to cut interest rates in the face of high inflation, to depreciate or appreciate the exchange rate depending on the fashion of the moment, to use foreign exchange reserves to fund projects that people are interested in, to display forbearance in classifying bad loans or waiving farmer loans, and again displaying forbearance. And these are all things we're asked to do. And in many situations, we have to say, no, this doesn't make sense from the perspective of macroeconomic stability. And it's not easy often to explain very quickly to people who don't have the kind of training you have, and sometimes even to people who have the kind of training, because monetary economics is different. Now, that doesn't mean we have to abandon the attempt to explain, which is why I'm coming here to explain RBI dividend policy to you. But we also must create a structure where the public trusts the central bank to do the right thing, and that is why we need a trusted, independent central bank. Okay? Now, I'm going to talk a little more about this, but I want to recall the words of my predecessor, Dr. Subba Rao, who wrote in his book and said in his last speech, "I do hope the finance minister will one day say, I'm often frustrated by the Reserve Bank, so frustrated that I want to go for a walk, even if I have to walk alone. But thank God the Reserve Bank exists." Now, the context, of course, is that there was a famous statement made by the then finance minister, saying that if the Reserve Bank wasn't cooperating, the government would have to walk alone. And this was Governor Subba Rao's response. But I would go a little further. I would say the Reserve Bank cannot just exist. Its ability to say no has to be protected. Now, at the same time, it can't become an extra constitutional authority. The central bank has to work under a framework set by the government. Now, all this requires a number of actions. First, it's important to set the framework under which the central bank works, to outline the responsibilities of the central bank. When the responsibilities are fuzzy, the actions can continuously be questioned. But instead, if a framework is designed, then the Reserve Bank can take actions consistent with that framework and be held responsible for the outcomes. One example of this is the inflation objectives recently set by the government for the Reserve Bank. Now, critics can lambast the Reserve Bank if it fails continuously to meet the objectives, But if people want lower interest rates, even when the RBI barely meets objectives, they should, instead of criticizing the RBI, petition the government to change the objectives. Basically, the government gives us our marching orders, we try and figure out how to achieve those objectives, but if those objectives cannot be achieved with the current level of interest rates and you're unhappy with the level, go petition the government to change the inflation objectives. Similarly, as I said, the board has adopted a risk management framework which indicates the level of equity the RBI needs. Now, given that, any surplus we provide after adjusting for the equity needed will be paid out as dividend to the government. We don't have to have a continuous dialogue about what level of dividends the RBI pays. Now, not everything has been thus codified or put into a framework. For example, the RBI's role in macroeconomic stability is still a little fuzzy. We know we have responsibility for the safety and soundness of banks and the stability of the external account, but areas like, for example, fiscal. If a government is fiscally taking too much fiscal burdens on itself, including contingent liabilities, this is going to affect our ability to maintain inflation, and we actually will have to raise interest rates corresponding to a more accommodative fiscal policy. Now, do we have a duty to warn the government that this will be the consequence? Do we have a duty to warn state governments that in fact they're taking too much on board? It is important to define what our role is, because warnings could be seen as interfering in the legitimate decisions of the elected representatives of the people. We need to know who does what. I think in addition to frameworks, we also need a oversight mechanism that the public is satisfied with. For example, we did the FCNRB swaps, taking a certain amount of risk, but in constant consultation with the finance ministry. Now, there are some government entities that want oversight over the RBI. Problem is, if you have multiple layers of scrutiny, too many people investigating what you do, essentially it hampers decision making, especially when the decision making, as I've just pointed out, is fairly technical, and the ability of other agencies to understand quickly is not that obvious. So instead, I would argue that the RBI board, which consists of government officials, people of eminence from elsewhere, including a number of financial professionals, should be entrusted, as it has been in the past, with oversight of the RBI. All important decisions today in the RBI, budgets, licenses, regulations, supervision, essentially go up to the board or its subcommittees. And what's important is the board essentially be filled out. Today there are a number of vacancies, and it's important that that be filled out. It's also important, like other countries, that we communicate with Parliament. Parliament consists of the elected representatives of the people. Periodically, we called up to testify before parliamentary committees. What we've started doing is going every 6 months to explain to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance, here's what we're doing, here are the issues that are important, here's why you should, what you should be concerned about. And they offer us their views and their advice also. And I think this is a good institution that has been built. So I talked about frameworks, I talked about oversight. A third aspect of independence is status or rank. There is a reason why central bank governors sit at the table along with finance ministers in G20 meetings. It is that the central bank governor, unlike other regulators or secretaries to the government, has command over significant policy levers. That's the kind of resources that the central bank governor has command over, but also has to occasionally disagree with the most powerful people in the country in order to fulfill his or her task of maintaining macro stability. You have to have the ability to say no. Now, as many of you know, it's dangerous to have a de facto powerful position, which in fact the RBI is, with low de jure status. Now, in India, we've reached a kind of accommodation here which I think serves us well. Today, the RBI governor has the salary of the cabinet secretary. He or she is appointed by the Prime Minister in consultation with the Finance Minister. The governor's rank in the government hierarchy is not defined. There is no explicit rank. But it's generally agreed that decisions made by the governor will be explained and discussed only with the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. So there is an informal understanding in all this that the governor has the room to make needed decisions, and this has worked very well in India today. I would argue going forward, none of this should be changed, though as a caveat, if these issues are ever revisited, there may be some virtue in explicitly setting the governor's rank commensurate with their position as the most important technocrat in charge of economic policy in the country. Let me end with the last element of independence, which is what I'm doing today, communication. It's very easy as a governor to suddenly convince yourself that you're an enchanting speaker, and all those TVs and cameras following you around are because people are desperately interested in your way of speaking. People follow you around because governors may offer market-moving information on policy. Now, fortunately, in my term, I've escaped unintentionally saying anything that moves markets. But at the same time, while different governors have different approaches to communication, we cannot dispense with it in this job. We are not a developed country where the chairman of the central bank can offer periodic Delphic pronouncements on the direction of interest rates and occasionally remonstrate with Parliament or the government about the course of fiscal policy. That's about what central bankers do in other countries. But in our country, we have to continuously make the case for the actions we are taking, build support for them, including the many structural reforms that are underway. There's nobody else who will do it for us. Sometimes because nobody else fully understands the ramifications, and sometimes because no one else has the incentive or the interest to do it, we have to communicate. And communication is as much about imparting information, but also about educating. For instance, as we've gone through this disinflationary environment, we've had to explain to one set of warriors, entrepreneurs and retail borrowers, why interest rates are not falling faster. And at the same time as we have to explain to them why interest rates are not falling faster, we have to explain to the saver, to the pensioner, why interest rates are not too low, right? And sometimes, I get a letter a day from a pensioner saying, interest rates were 9.5%, they're 7.25% now. Why are you killing me with low interest rates? And I have to explain, as I did in a public speech, using the price of dosas, why in fact this pensioner was better off today because the real interest rate he was getting was 1.5% to 2%, while earlier he was earning negative interest rates. But you have to continuously communicate because you have to try and get public support for the policies, and public understanding can make your task much easier. You have to explain again and again. And occasionally you have to warn about dangerous tendencies building up in the economy that would hurt growth and macroeconomic stability. And every once in a while, when you have an audience that is young and in the governor's role as a public figure, he or she should not duck the responsibility to urge students to follow the highest standards of citizenship. And this may sometimes involve moving outside the narrow realm of RBI dividends and monetary policy. Let me conclude. You've been patient. The weather is warm, which is why I discarded my coat. But let me conclude. This is a wonderful country. My parents gave me a great childhood and a great education. And they're giving you, your parents are giving you a wonderful childhood and a great education. We all grow up with debts. And public service is a way to repay these debts to our parents, to our country. I thought this stint here would be a way to do it, but I find that working with the dedicated colleagues at the RBI and the Finance Ministry, The last 4 years have been so fulfilling that I think I've received rather than given. We've undertaken what I believe are important reforms in payments, in banking, the conduct of monetary policy and liquidity management, in financial markets, in the resolution of distress, as well as within the institution of the RBI itself. Now, you never know what impact all these changes will have, only time will tell, but I can say that I've done the best job I could, and without fear or favor. This is the last public speech I'll give in India for a while. I think my successor has to take over that very important task of RBI communication, and it's important that I get out of his way. It's been an honor to work for the country, and especially to talk to people like you in its future. Thank you.